Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Countries that have got the space fiscally should use it. The UK is not one of those countries. Our debt as a share of GDP is around 100%.
Rachel Reeves went all the way to Washington, but she's still having to talk about her budget problems at home. So what was the Chancellor's key message while in the United States? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. Welcome to the programme. So finance ministers and central bankers from all over the world have been in Washington this week for the IMF and World Bank Spring Meetings. And it's meant to be a moment to discuss the state of the global economy, the shared challenges that they're facing. And this year, many of them emanate from just down the road, the White House, thanks to Donald Trump's trade war. Now, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is certainly thinking about how to minimise the damage to the UK, potentially through a trade deal.
Yeah, but look, as we heard, Rachel Reeves also can't get away from the issues at home, more pressing, the budget problem. She's quite right, the UK doesn't have much more room to borrow. We've heard that many times from the Chancellor before, but to deliver it in those terms, I think, was quite stark. The IMF itself didn't deliver much good news for the UK either, cutting the growth forecast for Britain by more than other European countries for both this year and next. That's despite the UK getting a lower tariff rate, just the 10% versus the 20%, although now paused, that the EU is being subject to. It's not all bad news comparatively. The fund does say that Britain is on track to grow faster than Germany, France and Italy, both this year and next year. We're talking about growth of 1.1 and 1.4%. So it's not massive numbers either. But in the global context of how uncertain and how complicated everything is, particularly with the trade story, that's where Britain sits in the global rankings.
So challenges are plenty, but did Reeves manage to stand out in the crowd of countries looking for a deal? We could talk now to Therese Raphael, a member of Bloomberg's editorial board, who joins us now for more. Did Reeves have a clear message this week other than growth, as it usually is?
Yeah, it was an interesting one from the Chancellor, because on the one hand, she gave a nod to Trump, saying he was right to call out trade imbalances, especially with China. But in the next breath, she also doubled down on the need or the defense of free trade and multilateral institutions. And that's a fine line to walk. I think her advocacy for free trade and her need to kind of tread this line is a reflection of the economic reality of being the chancellor of a mid-sized service-oriented economy that benefits significantly from open markets, right? So, Reeves is trying to position the UK as a stable, cooperative player in an increasingly fragmented global economy, but it's a tough sell. The US is back in full tariff mode. The EU is building its own sort of defenses, of preparing to impose retaliatory measures if there is no extension of that 90-day pause of the reciprocal tariffs. And, China is increasingly selective in its engagement and a tricky partner to trade with, as my colleague Matthew Brooker wrote in a column today anyhow. So I think while Reeves is right in principle, and you can understand what she's trying to do there, it can sound a bit like whistling in the wind in the current environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about the line that Rachel Reeves and the UK more broadly is trying to walk in a very complex global picture. I mean, how does that sort of messaging, the careful approach being taken by the UK, how's that going to go down in the White House?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of talk about whether the UK will get special treatment,
the special relationship, Therese.
Yeah, the special relationship, lest we forget. And there's always a degree of truth to that, and it's always wildly exaggerated. I mean, we know by now, don't we, that the U.S. plays by its own rules. And Trump's trade team has made it very clear that, even if you do get a little bit of, a warmth, a sort of presidential cuddle, if that were ever possible, it does not amount to sort of equal access. And the UK still faces those 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, while Washington, wants to see the EU and the UK cut down tariffs. There's not really a lot of hope that 10% baseline tariff is gonna drop. I think there will be I wouldn't be surprised if Reeves gets some kind of, maybe not this trip, but soon, some kind of a trade agreement with the US. I think Trump does have warm feelings towards the UK. He especially values his upcoming state visit. We know that intelligence ties run very deep, and those institutional bonds count for something still. The US still needs some friends in the world. So, I wouldn't be shocked if something comes out of that. But all of that said, I think the May 19th summit with the EU is likely to matter more. And, even Reeves kind of indicates that in one of her interviews, because, that's where real market access and regulatory cooperation are at stake. So the US relationship is about, it's an important relationship. It's the largest single trading partner, though the trade with the EU is bigger. But I think the EU is still the economic battleground for the UK. It's still a major focus. And I don't think what Trump would offer the UK is going to move the needle enormously in trade terms.
I want to come back to the EU, Therese, but I mean, I'm just thinking, do warm feelings actually matter at this point? There are so many people who are tearing their hair out at Keir Starmer at this point, desperate for him to do the Hugh Grant Love Actually moment. When, look at the tariffs, right? China seems to have got the biggest carve out here when it's the one with the biggest surplus. We're supposed to have the special relationship and our tariffs are exactly the same. Why not actually stand up to Donald Trump if he's going to penalise you anyway?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of cases where the tariffs make very little sense, right? We've heard lots of them, from islands with penguins and that sort of thing. I think the UK doesn't want to be Starmer and Reeves are going to great lengths to position the country as a bridge. And again, you understand why, given, Britain sits outside the EU, it has this long-standing security partnership and other, geopolitical based relations with the US. I think it would take a lot more than the sort of injustices and unfairness we've seen to have the UK just walk away from that. There's just too much at stake. But what we saw in Reeves's language and in the kind of ramping up of talks ahead of that May 19th summit is that the UK is now, spreading its bet, as it were, and looking for close relations with the EU. Reeves is, you take China. Reeves revived the UK-China economic and financial dialogue in January after, I think, a 5-year freeze, wants Chinese capital and export markets to become closer. I think that's a risk for this government, but you can see that the strategy is just to kind of make friends with everyone, try to be as open as possible and trade with everyone, because that's what helps the UK economy. Does it work with the US? Does it get them very far? It doesn't seem to at the moment.
Like, I was struck by the fact that Rachel Reeves, when she was speaking at the British Embassy in Washington, again, talking down China, criticising China for its trade policies, persistent trade surpluses, not always, in her words, because of transparent policies. Is that a reiteration of the UK's position, or should we read that as also Rachel Reeves waving a flag at Donald Trump and saying, we do agree with you on these points?
I mean, it's so hard to know because we've just recently seen the UK reaching out to China so vociferously. They want Shein to list on the London Stock Exchange. There's just a real sort of charm offensive on some fronts. This may be a signal that that will be reined in. I think what we know from Trump is that everything is linked to everything else he cares about. So there is no, meaningful trade concession without UK support on other issues that are important to this White House. And that will certainly mean some kind of, retrenchment from ties with China. And if the key goal, or one of the major goals of this very radical, almost revolutionary White House, is to create some kind of, is to isolate China, to contain China, to change the way the rest of the world trades with China, then you can bet the UK will, have a role to play on that and will be expected to sign up to that for any trade concessions or any other concessions that are given.
Therese, just to go back to the EU, at this summit on May the 19th between the UK and the EU that's happening in London, we're expecting a deal where they finalise plans that have been brewing over the past few weeks, and we've had lots of scoops on them from our Bloomberg UK government team. But in exchange for the UK giving fishing rights to the EU, we're expecting UK defence companies to qualify for access to this €150 billion defence fund. But really, my question to you is, do you expect it all to get over the line if they can't get over the hairiest details, like what to do about the European Court of Justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be deeply, deeply frustrating if in the current environment, Britain and Europe can't find common ground and agree on these simple things. I mean, Lizzy, you and I both were there
Scarred.
for those, those Brexit years, and you knew the kind of the tensions, all of the frictions of those years, but those have, by and large, fallen away to the extent that we can now get to a point where there is a discussion about more defense cooperation, which is, let's face it, deeply needed. We're in a world where the U.S. is pulling away from its security ties to Europe. We're not sure exactly the extent, but it's very clear that Europe, and that includes the UK, need to be prepared to support their own defense needs. And that will require not just, the current defense deal seems to be largely structured around giving Britain access to a new, EU fund for procurement, but it really needs, those ties need to go much deeper. It needs to be a reimagining of procurement rules of the defense industrial base, which is, hugely inefficient and full of duplications and lack of interoperability of different forces. So there's such a need for a very wide-ranging rethinking of this agreement. And you're absolutely right. If it founders over, fish, and important as that is, especially to France and some other countries, then I think the U.S. will look at it and say Europe is not serious about its securing its own defenses. It will not be able to be serious about Ukraine if it can't just even agree with its closest sort of friend and trading partner to make changes that strengthen the economies of both sides. So I think this May 19th summit is really important as an indicator of how willing they are to put these sort of past disagreements to one side and be practical on both sides, really.
Well, indeed, with potentially other disagreements to be had with other trading partners at the same time. Therese Raphael from Bloomberg's editorial board, thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so other people can find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
This episode was produced by James Wilcock and our audio engineer was Andrew Gavin. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back next week with more. This is Bloomberg.